Hi, this is David speaking from simplysolo.com. Look, today I'm speaking with Bruce Carter, and we're sort of like having a chat here today about a very important topic. And the topic is how to make anyone fall in love with you. Now, of course, the mere thought of something like that, getting anyone to fall in love with you, might mean, well, are they going to do it because they really want to do it? Or can we get people to fall in love with us so it's their decision, their choice, and something that they're willingly doing, and they're not conscripted by us to do so. So what we're going to be talking today about with Bruce is a step-by-step method, and Bruce will take us through a method of how you can get the person that you want to get them to fall in love with you. Now, first of all, you're going to have to do this technique on yourself and see how you fall in love and what your falling in love strategy actually is. So the first part of the phase here is discovering what your strategy is, so that therefore when you meet someone who you want to find out what their falling in love strategy is, you'll know what to do next. So okay, what we'd like to do now is I'll turn it over to Bruce Carter and introduce him, and he'll take you through the process that we're doing here today on simplysolo.com. Hi Bruce.
Hi, how are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good, thanks Bruce. Look, Bruce, we've had a lot of good success recently with the videos on how to find a soulmate and how to attract your soulmate, which are some of the other associated videos here in this series that we're doing on Simply Solo. Today what I've wanted to do is talk with you about an old pet subject that we've brought up several years ago when we were first running seminars on the subject of love and finding soulmates. As you might recall, back in the 90s we were doing some of this sort of thing back then, weren't we?
Yep.
Yeah, back in the old days when we used slide projectors instead of data projectors. So it's been around for quite a while, hasn't it?
Yep.
Well look, what I'd like you to do, Bruce, is to explain what you told me all those years ago and some of the clients that you were working with way back then that I was very impressed with, how to actually get someone to fall in love with you. Could you explain what's behind that step-by-step process and give us a little bit of an example?
Yeah, of course. I want to tell you a story, and this is the true story that happened. Is I took out a couple of girlfriends of mine out to dinner, and I'd known these girls for probably 2 or 3 years, and I asked them a series of questions, and I put them through a process so that they would learn how to fall in love. And within a week, both of them rang me up and had decided they were in love with me after knowing them for a few years. So I want to give you some insight into this process.
We're not saying that this would make just anybody a stud overnight or a studette. But is the technique that you had in those questions, is that right?
Yeah, it's the process of how people go about falling in love.
You'll have to speak up just a little bit more.
Romantically in love. And the reason I want to show you this, and the reason I want you to perhaps give this a go yourself, is so you can understand the structure of how your mind might fall in love or not fall in love. So you get an understanding of where love is.
Right, and what would be, can you give us an example of what that process would be? You know, like the 1, 2, 3, A, B, C. What we need to do to begin? Okay,
so here's what I want you to do. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to go back in time in your memory and figure out a time when you fell in love, when you experienced love, perhaps for the first time, or perhaps a time when you were really intensely in love. Now here's what I want you to do. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to step back in that experience. So you're back in your body, you're feeling like you're falling in love with a person, and you're looking out through your eyes, and what are you seeing? So the third thing I want you to do is I want you to recognize what you are seeing, hearing, or feeling in that particular situation. So is someone putting their arm around you and talking to you? Yeah. Is someone even maybe feeding your cat? And you're attaching the fact that the person really cares about your cat to love? Or are you attaching something else? So what are you actually seeing, hearing, and feeling in that situation for you to feel love?
So it's more like, what was the trigger for those intense love feelings and how they come about, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So what was the actual behaviour that you're seeing?
In say, the former boyfriend or girlfriend that you went out with, or partner that you were with for whatever,
Yep.
what actions that they took in the very early days that made you say, oh wow, I'm really with that person, I'm really into this person.
100%.
Okay.
So what did they say to you in that moment? You know, what were they doing?
Or their tone of voice, whether they held your hands, or whether they'd rung you up at a certain time and said, hey, I'm just caring about you.
Yeah.
Those types of actions, and the chronology of what happened in that time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. What was happening in that moment? Okay. Now what you've got there is you've got what's called a behavioural complex equivalent to love. And that will actually stem back to how you first understood love from perhaps your parents.
Really?
So any time that particular behaviour comes through your life, it's very, very difficult not to feel in love with the person who you're falling in love with.
So, in a sense, it could be like, for example, for some, like if a woman has her hair brushed by a friend, that could be considered, hey, this is the kind of caring that I experienced as a kid, although they may not think of it that way, but subconsciously that they're getting that action to feel that way again, and therefore they're saying, I really love this guy because he's combing my hair.
Yeah.
Right?
Have you ever had a girl, if you're a guy, have you ever had a girl come and brush something off your shoulder of your jacket?
Oh, yeah.
And had intense feelings around the fact that she just did that behaviour?
Yeah, where everyone else just stood around and this person just did something that was a very simple yet, fairly inconsequential thing, but it was a very big thing because they did it towards me.
Yeah, it elicited powerful feelings, okay? So that is how we create what's called a behavioural complex equivalent around love in your life.
Right.
Okay? And anytime you understand that with someone else's behavioural complex equivalent, or anytime you understand how someone else goes about falling in love, and you move yourself through that process, you will always elicit the exact same feelings from that person of being in love.
But of course...
So David, I taught you this technique and we refreshed it recently. Can you give an example, the viewers an example of what your experience is of using this technique?
Yeah, sure, Bruce. Look, when I first heard the technique from you back in '97, I remember you giving to me 3 basic points, which we wrote down in a little notepad, much the same as what you've got here, and I just put it in my top pocket and thought, well, I really want to study this and make sure I've got it, because I'd just come out of a relationship and I was looking to go into a new relationship and I didn't quite know how to connect the dots. So very thankfully, Bruce, you gave me a few techniques, and part of it was this. What I did was I went out and I went on a few dates, and then one lady appeared to me relatively soon after, whom of which I asked her what made her fall in love. So she recounted to me a few basic simple things. Well, one of the examples was like this. She says, well, I felt love with a guy when he held my hands and gave me a kiss when he met me. I thought, gee, that sounds too simple. You'd think that way, wouldn't you, Bruce, Anyway, that very self-same evening after we'd had a bite to eat, and it wasn't really anything, we didn't go to a restaurant or anything, we just went to a cafe and had a bite to eat and went for a walk around the Harbour Bridge, nothing really big deal. Anyway, later that night it was something no more simple than the two of us holding hands as we walked, and therefore when we sat down on the park bench and had wonderful views of the city, I went for a kiss and bang, she was in love with me. And we were seeing each other on a regular basis thereafter. So it didn't take very long. As another example, on another occasion I remember meeting a lady who told me a rather complex example of how she'd actually gone out with different guys, and she had said, well, yeah, look, I'd gone out with a guy for maybe, once or twice on a day, and, we'd spent some private time together, and therefore I fell in love, and it all happened within about 2 or 3 weeks. Well, she explained that to me. We went through a similar thing, and lo and behold, before the month was over, bang, she was in love with me. And we went out with each other for a very long period of time. What I can say here is, Bruce, is that by getting the person to relive their experience of what it was like to fall in love, they were then attaching those feelings intensely directly back to me. So I do know that it does work. And I was probably a relatively slow learner in one sense. It took me about a couple of weeks to put this into practice, but it worked pretty well straight away the moment I did. So I'm very thankful, Bruce, that your techniques work really well.
That's no problem, David.
Thanks.
Anything to help you with?
Hi, Bruce. Is there anything else you'd like to add further to what we've just discussed about getting someone to fall in love?
No, the only thing I can say is go back through this process, replay it a couple of times so you understand it, put yourself through it as I'm talking, and give it a go, because once you understand contrasts of doing something one way against doing something another way, you will see the difference, and more importantly, you'll gain the wisdom and the understanding of how to make something happen in your life, and more importantly, how to meet someone who's closer and closer and closer to what you ideally want as a person, and that's the goal.
True. You could even turn a casual cafe conversation with a stranger sitting literally right next to you into a falling in love experience just through a conversation like this.
100%.
Would that be true?
100%.
And that's all it really takes, is just taking action, which is something that we said on the last video, is taking action is far, far more important than just getting all the theory in the world. Got to take some action. That's what both you, Bruce, and I believe.
Yeah, if you've got that desire to fall in love, then get it out there.
Hear, hear. Sounds really good, Bruce. Well, look, what we're going to be talking about, Bruce, the next time round is about the power of touch. So I'm looking forward to doing that video. And I know in this case here, Bruce, you're going to be interviewing me. So that's going to be a bit of fun. And we'll certainly set up a little example and of what's going to come up, and it'll be really exciting, which will just show in a bit more of a flow-on process about what falling in love is really all about. So, all of those who are looking at great ways how to fall in love with people, go out there and have some fun times.
Yep.
SimplySolo.com, this is David and Bruce speaking, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
See you next week.
Okay.